In today's video, we're going to be getting started with shared libraries in Jenkins. Are you new here? If you are, welcome. And if you are new here, you don't know who I am. My name is Darin, and I'm a developer advocate for CloudBees. When you're first starting with declarative pipelines in Jenkins, you're probably starting out really small and simple. But over time that grows and you keep adding more and more stages. Sometimes though, there's things you want to do. So you go and grab an old copy of a pipeline, put it in the new job, make a couple of changes, but then there's one section that's always exactly the same. That's where a shared library can come in and help. With a shared library, we can create what we'll call a custom step. And from there, we can reuse that step in all of our pipelines. Why is that such a great thing? Being able to create your own custom step without having to create a plugin makes your life much easier and simpler because it's a much easier problem to solve. As you can see here, this is the documentation for shared libraries. The great thing about it, it's all on one page at Jenkins.io. The link for this documentation will be right below this video. Now let's take a look through it so you can understand what a shared library is and what it can do for you. Much like I just said, we want to be able to reuse parts of pipelines between different projects. We'll be going through an example of that in just a few moments. The thing about a shared library is that it has a very specific directory structure. I've got a separate Git repository that we're going to be using for our shared library as we go through this demonstration. But there's up to 3 top-level folders in this repository. There's going to be vars, resources, and source. Now in our example today, we're only going to be working inside of vars. Using resources and source are more advanced topics that we'll visit in another video. Since we're just going to be taking a look at vars today, let's take a look at the documentation as it's called out. These are going to host the files that are exposed as a variable. I previously used the phrase custom step. So anything that is in vars is considered to be a global variable from a Jenkins perspective. So when we create files inside of vars, they'll be named whatever the step is that we want to call, and then .groovy. Now these files are not Groovy files, but the extension needs to be a .groovy extension. Also, you can create a .txt file that matches the .groovy file name, and that will be the help that shows up in the global variables. In order to use these shared libraries, we first have to set it up inside of our controller. And we'll do this live in a few moments, but to get to this, you'll go to Manage Jenkins and then Configure System, and we'll scroll down to the Global Pipeline Library section, and we'll see what that looks like. You can also create shared libraries at a folder level, whether that's actually a folder or maybe it's a multi-branch pipeline. You can also create the shared libraries at that level. The big difference between the global and the folder level is that the folder-based libraries are not considered trusted. So they run just in the sandbox, just like how your pipelines run. We're not going to go through the rest of this documentation right now, but I do want to make sure that you're aware of one thing before we get into it. When we actually call and use our shared library, we'll be using this annotation @library at the top of our pipeline. But then I want you to notice one thing right here, the space and the underscore. Now the space and underscore, treat it like, let's say you're a Java developer. This is sort of like saying import package.star. The space underscore says, hey, give me everything that's inside of the shared library. Because you could specify, hey, I only want handfuls of certain things. But in our case, we want to be able to load up the complete shared library. We're now at our Jenkins controller login screen, so we're going to go ahead and log in. And just for reference, this is Jenkins LTS 2.263.2. This setup that we're getting ready to go through has not changed in a very, very long time. So what we're going to go into is we're going to go over here to Manage Jenkins, Configure System. Let's go ahead and scroll down to Global Pipeline Libraries. Almost there. And it says shareable libraries available. This is exactly what we want. Great. Click on Add. And I'm probably going to have to scroll over here just a little bit. There we go. And let me zoom back out. Okay, there we go. Okay, we're going to give it a name. Now this will be the name that we will reference in our pipeline files to be able to use this shared library. I'm just going to call mine shared library. The default version can be a branch name, a tag, or even a commit hash. Now, the way that my repository is currently set up, I have a branch in there, and the branch is called master. There are a couple of different settings here. I recommend leaving these as default until you start to understand more what they do for you. In short, load implicitly means anytime a pipeline runs, this shared library will be loaded, whether you're using anything from it or not. I personally prefer always saying, hey, I want to load up the libraries that I want. So I typically do not check load implicitly. The allow default version to be overridden gives you the ability to say, hey, by default it's going to be master, but maybe I want to pull in from a different tag or a different commit hash or even a completely different branch. If I allow the default version to be overridden, then that's great, but I might not want people doing that in real life production. As I'm doing development right now, this is helpful, so I'm going to leave it checked. And include at library changes and job recent changes. I always just leave that checked. Now, let's go ahead and get hooked up to my Git repository. I'm going to select Modern SCM. Then I'm going to select Git. And I'm going to go out to GitHub, and the link to this repository will be down in the description. I'm going to grab the clone URL, and I'm going to grab the HTTPS version of it. Since this is a public repository, I don't have to worry about credentials. I'll do that. And that's it. That's all that I need to do for a basic setup. There are other things you can do through behaviors if you needed to. Again, a shared library repository is meant to be used just for the shared library. Don't put anything else in there. It's meant to do one specific thing. Don't put a shared library structure in with bunches of other files. It's meant to do one thing only. Okay? That's all I need to do to get it set up. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Save. But before we continue, I'm going to go back over to Manage Jenkins, Configure System. We're going to go back down there again. And if you look under Master now, you can see that Master currently maps to revision CD0F. If we go back over to my repository, you can see that my latest commit is CD0F. So this helps me validate that I'm able to use, or that I'm able to map to this specific Git branch along with its, and I'm validating that the commit hash was the same, so I know I'm looking at what I expect to see. Okay, so we have wired in our shared library into our controller. Now let's go through a sequence of events and understand how we will be able to use that shared library in just a few moments. Now the shared library that I have here has lots of different examples, some in better health than others. The one that we'll be taking a look at is what we're going to be focusing on. If you come back and look at this later, some of these may or may not be working. That's okay. These are just some examples that you may or may not be able to use. Okay, let's head back over to our controller. I'm going to create a new job. And I'm going to call it test pipeline. Whoops, got to select pipeline first. There we go. In a normal situation, you would not be putting your pipeline directly into this pipeline script block, but I'm doing that for this demonstration purpose. All right, I'm going to go and grab an example, very simplistic pipeline. So if we paste this in here, you're going to see, and I will go ahead and bump this back up. There we go. We've got pipeline. I'm going to be using an agent that has a label of Linux. And I'm going to run a very simple step. And it's just going to be sh echo hello world. Very, very simple. Click on save. And let's see what happens here. I click on build now. And looking at the output, we can see that this is a very lightweight console log. I basically want you to look at the shape of this console log. And what I mean by shape is it's pretty short, just a couple of lines, and that's it. As we move forward, you're going to see this change over time. So basically all we have here is echo hello world. Well, let's go to the top. It was started by admin. It's running in performance optimized. It's running on agent 1, and then it does the echo, and that's done, which is exactly what our pipeline was written to do. Very, very, very simple. This is the place you want to start. But now what I want to do is I want to modify this echo hello world, and I actually want to call a custom step that I have. And in fact, let's go ahead and go over, take a look at it. I've already prepared for this up front. I have a hello world custom step already created. It's in vars and it's hello world. Notice that it's camel cased. If you go back and take a look at the documentation, it recommends using camel cased for the file names inside of vars if it needs to be camel cased. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be extracting out the sh echo hello world, and we're putting it inside of this def call closure. So call is what's used and is the default for what we're going to be calling from here. So I'm going to change this to hello world. When I call hello world with just the open and close parentheses, that will call this call value, and then what is inside of this will be executed. Okay, so let's go ahead and do one more thing. The one thing that we forgot to do here is we need to bring in that library. So I'm going to do an @L library, and in quotes I'm going to do shared library. And if you remember back in the documentation, I'm doing the space underscore, so I don't forget to pull in everything from the shared library. You want to keep your shared libraries usually fairly small. Small in file count, which determines back to disk size, because every time a pipeline runs, that shared library is being cloned into the workspace. So it's a very key part. So if your shared library is large, meaning large megs, that could impact your runtime. Probably not by a lot, but it could impact it. So I've got @library, shared-library, space underscore. I have changed my sh to just hello world. Let's click save. And we will click on build now. Let's see what happens here. Going back to that first run that we did, remember I said to take a look at the shape of the console log? Now take a look at it. We've got admin, performance optimized, and right here, loading library, shared-library at master. What does that mean? We had our @library annotation in our pipeline. We gave it a name of shared library, but we didn't specify master. Where does that come from? So if you were to go back and take a look at the configuration, we saw a shared library. It has a default of master. It's pulled together, and now we're able to clone in the master branch from that repository that's configured against shared library. Everything that we see here down to here is all associated to the clone of the shared library. And you can see here that the rest of this pipeline just ran as expected. So the only thing extra that we received was this clone for our shared library repository. So when you're first starting out introducing a shared library in, keep it really simple. Don't try to build out everything to begin with. Just get one simple step in there, make sure it imports in, make sure it does what you're expecting before you move on to create bigger things. So let's go back to our configuration here. And we can see that we were calling hello world, which was this value right here, hello world groovy. Now, let's assume for a moment that I don't like how I'm echoing this field out. I'm going to make a change to the value of hello world, or the render of hello world, just because I want it to be uppercase. So I'm going to say upper H, upper W. I commit the change, and now I've got upper H, upper W. I'm not making any changes to my pipeline. This is the power of a shared library custom step. Because I can make that change, and anybody that's using that custom step will receive that change when they run their job the next time. So let's go ahead and do that. So we do a build now. We'll go back over here and take a look at the output of 3. We go down here to the output and we see echo upper H, upper W. Exactly what I wanted. I made 0 changes to the pipeline. I made the change to my custom step, which is my file inside of the vars folder inside of the shared library repository. So now I'm ready to move on to make that a little more complex, just a little. Well, what does that mean? So what I want to do now is I want to pass in 2 parameters. I'm going to pass in my name and the day of the week. So let's edit this file. I'm going to say string name, string day of week, and I'm going to modify my output to use those variables. Today is day of week, of week. Okay, that looks good. Let's go ahead and click on commit changes. And then let's modify our pipeline to pass in those parameters. Whoops, I hit the wrong thing. Pipeline to pass in those parameters. So what I have here is Darin, and today is Thursday. Save. Now let's build it. Now we can see from the output, we see our cloned shared library. Hello, Darin. Today is Thursday. So those are the 2 parameters that we passed in. But that's not such a great thing, especially from within the pipeline. There may be more intermediate and advanced reasons why you might want to use positional parameters. But from a pipeline, I have no idea what this first position is, because it's not very clear what it would be. I would have to go and take a look at this, which probably I'd have to take a look anyway. But if I was just to mess up and invert these, I wouldn't know, and then I would say, hello Thursday, today is Darin, and that would not make any sense. So what we're going to do here is we're going to modify our custom step one more time. I'm going to change this to a map. Now I could just say map config, but I'm going to go one step further, and I'm going to set it to an empty map. If I put in the right keystroke, there we go. And instead of it just being name, it's going to be config.name. Now this is where the conventions of maps from Groovy apply. So we're just saying config dot, and we're just going to use dot notation to be able to pull in that parameter. And then we'll see how those come into us. Now this is a very simple example. In reality, what you should do, and I'm not going to go here, is I should probably make sure that config.name is not empty. I should probably make sure that config.dayofweek is not empty. I probably want to do some extra validation. Is day of week really a real day of week? Because I may want to fail the job if you're not passing me valid values. I may want to do sanitization on this input. Lots more steps. But for right now, this is the simple starting point. I'm passing in a map, and then I'm going to lift attributes off of the map and use it in my echo statement. Let's go ahead and save this. And let's go back to our pipeline. Now what we're going to do is modify our pipeline to say name and day of week. So just a key value pair. But I'm going to mix it up just a little bit. I'm going to put my day of week at the front because it's just a map. Positions do not matter at this point. So we can see here day of week, name Darin. Let's click on save, and let's go ahead and do a build now. We'll flip back into here. And now you can see the output is still, hello Darin, today is Thursday. So even with the changes to our pipeline, by passing in the parameters through a map instead of positionally, we're able to make our custom step calls a little more robust. So that's it. That's a quick overview of how to get started with shared libraries in Jenkins. But although it was trivial, it forms the foundation of everything else you'll be doing in shared libraries. In future videos, we'll be going into other concepts of how to use shared libraries. If this video was helpful for you, go ahead and give us a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to CloudBees TV yet, why not? Go ahead and click on that subscribe button right now, and then ring that bell. And that way you'll be notified anytime there are new videos on CloudBees TV. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.